I'm Michael Croker, and this is Park Life, a deep dive into the Australian theme park industry. This week I sit with Christophe Broadway, performer, event coordinator, and someone who has dedicated a life to entertainment, including 20 years with Warner Brothers Movie World. There is a little bit of ambient sound throughout our conversation, as we were sitting nearby a coffee outlet that Christophe also operates, located in Broadbeach on Queensland's beautiful Gold Coast. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to share, like, and review. It all helps spread the word. Here we go.
My first gig, I was 4 years old.
Wow.
Was in Paris, and it was more modelling gig, and that was just because my mum and dad were in the industry, and sort of that's how I got into it. As a child, I thought I wanted to be an actor, so I worked towards that as a career base. And we did a lot, did little plays, little theatrical, a lot of TV commercials in those days. As a kid, I did a lot of TV commercials. And then into my teens, started doing shopping centre performances. In those days, you don't see it much now, but they used to book shows, staged productions, and they were usually licensed shows. That was the Fred Flintstone show or Looney Tunes shows. Ninja Turtles was a big one in the 80s, and that toured everywhere. And that's, I guess, when I started working in theme parks, because in those days Dreamworld would book in season shows. They didn't have, I believe now they've got a licensed residential show, but now, back then would book in for the season, do a couple of weeks. We weren't working for the theme park, we were working at the theme park. And then as I got older, I was doing corporate gigs. A lot of that was with Magic, and I learned everything I could, so I get gigs wherever. So I did a lot of gigs at SeaWorld, and again had that experience in the theme park, but not for the theme park. Then, it would have been around 89, John Menzies, who was the general manager of SeaWorld at the time, told me that they were building a new theme park that was going to be entertainment focused. That was huge, and that was super exciting. So I wanted somehow to get involved in that. And I was part of the opening cast in developing the opening and the launch of Movie World. And that's sort of what really kicked off my theme park phase of my life.
There's a lot in there. If we could go back in time a little bit, You were talking about being in Paris, and you mentioned briefly, I think, that it was in the family, entertainment was in the family. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
All right, so my grandfather used to tour Australia, production shows around Australia as a producer, and then my father was a performer, and he performed a lot in Australia, and then finally ventured out overseas. And he ended up working at the Lido Paris. The Lido Paris in those days, and to some extent still is, was a very prestigious venue to perform as an act. It was the first Australian act to work both the Lido and the Moulin Rouge in Paris. Well, while he was there, he met Mum. And
what was she doing?
Well, he actually met her sister first. She was dancing in the show with him. And then he met Mum. Mum was a model, a fashion model. And so married her, came back to Australia, had me, but then very quickly took me back to France because he was touring Europe performing. I had to do different shows. So I grew up basically travelling with my parents.
So it was kind of in the blood right from the very beginning.
With a surname like mine, you kind of, not much else you can do really, is there?
That's right. Did you develop your own love for performance? And if you did, when I say that, you were growing up in it, it was in the family, in the culture. Was there a particular aspect of it that really drew you in, that you wanted to grow on? You mentioned wanting to be an actor. What was the attraction for you?
I wanted to be, where my memory goes back to as a child, I wanted to be in movies. Yeah. That was what, whereas my mum and dad, they were stage performers. But no, my view was film. I wanted to be in the movies. And that's what my vision was at the time. So I wanted to learn acting, study accents. That was where I thought I was heading. And I did do some work on sets in movies, but I was also, by virtue of paying the bills, had to do live performances as well. And I did develop a love for theatre, to the point where my love for theatre overshadowed my love for film. And at an interesting moment on set one day where I realised that what I wanted, I just finished a tour of Australia with late John English and Simon Gallagher, just standing ovations and the theatre vibe, and then got back to the Gold Coast.
So that was Pirates of Penzance?
Pirates of Penzance, Mikado. We did 3 different shows.
Gotcha.
And they were all so much fun to work with. Absolutely highlight of my career working with those guys. And came back to the Gold Coast, got a job on set, a main part in the movie, and I remember sitting in my trailer with the script and my laptop, thinking, I'm not enjoying this. This is slow paced, it's kind of drags out, it's kind of boring. But this is all I ever thought I wanted to do. But I like the other stuff. I wanted to get back on the stage. I wanted to be involved with the live action and the crowds. And that was the turning point in my mindset. So I don't want to be a screen actor anymore. Sure, the money's great, but that's not what I wanted to be anymore. I wanted to get more involved, and I wanted to get more hands-on involved. It's when I wanted to realize I want to direct, I want to produce, I want to cast, I want to get into it. I don't want to just be the guy on the stage. We're starting to feel mundane, if that makes any sense.
Was that film Blood Moon?
No.
It wasn't. What was it?
That movie was called The Product. It was a straight to cable American show.
Fantastic, because I asked, because I know we've had this chat in the past. Before I'd met you, I'd seen you on screen at a local drive-in on the Gold Coast in a horror film called Blood Moon. I've got that right, haven't I?
That's right, yeah.
And I just knew as you appeared on the screen, that's that guy that works at Movie World. Because I was working at SeaWorld at the time,
right.
And obviously it was a sister park. And so I was aware of you then, having that background. And then I think it was years later I was hosting as an MC an awards evening for Miss Summer Surf Girl, and we've had these conversations in the past. And I don't think it was you, I think it was your brother, Remy, that was the opening act at this event that I was the MC for, and I'd gone backstage, and your mum was there from memory, and I hadn't met you at this point, and I was in my 20s at the time, and I just remember asking what's the name of the act and how would you like me to introduce you? And just seeing, again, your mother back there as well, and realising, as I got to know you over the years, this is a entertainment, arts-based family through and through, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your brother has also had quite a career and had time working within the theme parks, a show announcer at SeaWorld.
That's right, yeah.
So it really is there in the blood. So when John Menzies was telling you about what would become Warner Brothers Movie World, and you were sitting in the trailer and realising, I want to get back out in the field, what was the appeal there? Was it just the fact that it was so dynamic and so fast-paced?
So at the time I spoke to John Menzies, that we were actually talk about Blood Moon, it was at the premiere screening of Blood Moon and the gala dinner afterwards that I met John Menzies. He was actually sat next to me at the table at the gala dinner. And the reason he had been invited is because Village Roadshow and SeaWorld were collaborating for Movie World, so he was invited to all the Village Roadshow events. And he had seen me perform at Expo 88, which, for those who don't know, Expo was a big event, an international event held in Brisbane, 6-month-long event, and it was pretty much what kick-started Brisbane's awareness of street theatre. And he had seen me at Expo, recognised me from Expo, and said, "You're exactly the kind of entertainment we need at our park." And I said, "Your park? What's SeaWorld?" No, we're building a new park. And he told me all about this exciting, and he likened it to Universal Studios, this new park right here, and they had just broken the earth, but you couldn't tell what they were building yet at the time, because the gala dinner was at the studios. And that was exciting to me because Expo 88 was a hoot. It was absolutely awesome, and the thought of doing that full time was very appealing. Obviously, you can't maintain that kind of vibe long term, but I was young and naive. I thought that's great. So very exciting.
From that moment to the point of the park opening, how much time passes, do you think?
Probably 6 months before the park started to look like a park, and that's when I called up John Menzies. Now, I didn't realise back then that calling up John Menzies is not something people just do, but I just called the park. In those days it was a phone book, looked up the phone book and called the reception, said, "I want to speak to John Menzies," and next thing I know I'm talking to John Menzies. And I said, "Oh, it's Christophe Broadway here, we met at the blah 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 dinner," and "Oh yes, you need to talk to Martin Molam, I'll put you through." Puts me through to Martin Molam, and very confused Martin Molam answers. Martin Molam was the entertainment manager at the time. Very confused Martin Molam says, "Hello?" I said, "Oh yeah, it's Christophe here. John Menzies said I need to talk to you about," "Oh yes, okay, well can you come in tomorrow?" And so I came in and started talking about how this entertainment's going to look like in the park, and walked through the construction sites, and probably another maybe another 6 months from that point, we were actually rehearsing, or rehearsals had started on the site, and then the park opened.
And so Martin brings you in and gets a sense of who you are and what you can contribute, and you're right there at the very ground zero for what becomes a national treasure. What's the first thing that you're doing in that role, and what was the role when the park was birthed?
When the first entertainment, they didn't have a lot of structure yet. They had the Police Academy show, they had a Western show, and they had the Bonnie and Clyde bank robbery street show, and the rest was very loose, very loose. So a lot of us were just roving. We had a couple of jugglers, we had a couple of magicians. A lot of it was just still fairly roving stuff. And we had the Penguin character because they had a Gotham City set that was being finished. He showed us the Gotham City set, so it's going to be this Penguin character. The wardrobe department wasn't built yet. It wasn't till a year in that we had a wardrobe department in the theme park. So we were using the studio wardrobe department, which gave us access to all the old movie costumes as well. All the stuff that had ever been filmed in those studios was in this big, it was upstairs like an attic. And they had all these army costumes, these pinstriped mafia outfits and stuff. So we would just go in there and raid the costumes. And say, oh, let's do Cadence as a Warner Brothers movie. Let's take these army costumes and do a Cadence routine. Or let's take these mafia outfits and we'll just be a mafia gang. And then and it was awesome fun because we were creating, and we had a time, you had the right team to basically theatre workshop basic concept and then take it out in the park and theatre sport it. So it was almost all ad lib, with a few set gags to thread it together.
You'd be road testing content in real time for a live audience in real time.
That's right.
And then finding what works in real time and what doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the danger, is knowing where to take it and having, and we had Adam Cooper was more or less our head honcho when it came to this theatre sports stuff. And he ran a lot of theatre sports in those days, and he would take the lead. So we'd be watching him and he'd steer us back. If he thought we were going too far, he'd steer us back. And we had our cue lines. So say, when Adam says this, we'll get back to this point. But it was always so loose. And sometimes you think, okay, I don't know where he's taking this. I'm with him, but we had that faith in each other that we could back each other up.
When you're doing that too, you're sharpening your tools as a performer, aren't you?
And that is very helpful when you're in an environment where you're working 5 days a week, 52 weeks in the year after year. It's easy for a performer to get stale or an artist to get complacent, and probably now even more so because your audience is the same one. These days you've got your season pass holders. They're coming every weekend, so they're seeing the Joker every weekend. Well, what's the Joker going to do today? I've seen him do the same thing last week. In those days, at least, we had a better turnover, or a more fluent turnover of international tourists.
Yes.
So it was a different vibe then. But even then, you could get stale, you could fall into a rut if you weren't constantly working on your techniques or your tools, as you say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Were there ever moments, so far it's a very confident kind of trajectory, and I know for a lot of people they can get in their own way and almost falter at the point of an opportunity because they're trapped in their own heads. Mm-hmm. Do I have what it takes? Am I able to do this? What if I fail? And all that inner talk. Particularly for performers who will genuinely be feelers and will genuinely be more vulnerable than most people. More for the fact that good art will come out of a vulnerability and an honesty. Mm-hmm. Were there moments along that trajectory for you where you had to work through any kind of doubt, or here's this whole thing being created and you're at the start of that? And if you had any kind of self-doubt, how did you move through that?
We, in the first couple of years, it was all roses. Everything was easy. When I say easy, it was within our comfort zone.
Your wheelhouse.
To an extent. Obviously, we were always pushing our boundaries by virtue of having that street theatre or that theatre sport vibe. But we were also working a lot externally, which again gave us that confidence.
What does that mean, externally?
When I say externally, I mean we were still doing work at the studios. We were able to go, and that was the advantage too. In our lunch break, we'd go over and do a casting or an audition at the studios, and we'd get like a couple of days on set or something. So we were always getting other work. I was still doing a lot of corporate gigs.
We should just mention so that people know that may not be aware. When we reference the studios, Village Roadshow Studios on the Gold Coast, shares a landmass right by Warner Brothers Movie World. So when you're talking about how easy that is, it literally is that easy. The what was the Lethal Weapon coaster, which in later years became the Arkham Asylum coaster, was quite literally on the fence line.
That's right.
Of the studio lot.
For many years, we shared the canteen. We had a canteen up in the studios, and anyone working that end of the park would go to that canteen for lunch. And it was the same canteen as anyone working in the theatre, in the films, productions. We used the same canteen.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it was that easy, that close.
So sorry to cut your flow. So yeah, you were talking about the access and the ease of that. Did that make it easier to kind of develop confidence quick?
Yes, it did. And there's a certain amount of ego in that too. We were pretty full of ourselves. And then look,
the joy of youth.
Well, let's be frank. We thought we were pretty hot. We've got this great gig. We're good at it. There's not much else going on the coast. We're it. We think we're the shit. And then you get your little challenges. When we first got Batman into the park, and Batman came into the park a year in, and we were celebrating its first birthday and the launch of the new Bat Ride. Now, up to that point, no one had ever seen Batman, and Batman in the 90s, early 90s, was huge.
And this is the cinematic version.
That's
too,
right.
We're talking
so
about.
It was the second Batman movie that was coming out at the same time with Catwoman and
Batman
Penguin.
Returns.
Yeah. So it was at this point there'd only been one other Batman movie. So there's a lot of talk. Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to launch this Batman? What are we going to do with him? He can't just walk around the park like Bugs Bunny. It has to be something. So some of us were stunt trained, and we're going to build this show. So we abseil down the wall, or some fight scenes. We've got the Batmobile in. We'll drive in. We'll make a big production out of it. So then we had this great idea. We're going to climb up the wall as well. Climbing up the wall in a bat suit is not as easy as it might sound. And it required counterweights and pulleys and stuff. And that was the first time at Movie World where I really struggled with what was my task. Because the first few attempts going up that wall, I didn't make it.
And you're wearing a full Keaton type.
I was in actual suit from the set because we hadn't started making them yet. They flew the suits over. One of them actually had Michael Keaton's initials in the head.
Incredible.
That I was wearing.
Yeah.
And apparently he's a similar height to me, whatever, because I was wearing one of his suits. But climbing up, and this suit, also bear in mind, these suits are designed to stand and look good in front of a camera. They weren't, and the wardrobe department spent a lot of research and time investing in developing those suits to a point where you could actually move in them.
Joints could move and limbs could move.
Yeah, so this was quite we tore a lot of the bottoms of trying to climb and stuff, but that was, I think, the first time where I doubted myself, saying, I don't know if I can actually do this. And Vic Wilson, the stuntman, was there, and he was applying the pressure on me, saying, you better get this right, because there are other people that want to do this. You better get this right. And he was onto me because a lot of the Police Academy cast were like seasoned stuntmen, wondering why they're not doing the gig. Then opening night, nailed it. Just went up that wall, because as you know, as a performer yourself, that adrenaline rush when you've got thousands and thousands of people watching you, the music's playing, the lights on you, the crowd, it's your moment, and suddenly you have this temporary superhuman strength. I just fired up that wall. And from that point on, I was Batman. And for the next year, because we had the ride launch, we had the opening, so Batman was being flown to Kuala Lumpur, he's being flown to Tokyo, he's being flown to Sydney, he's abseiling down. I had to abseil down buildings in Tokyo, I had to abseil down shopping centres in Philippines. It was a gig and it was mine. I was the guy. It was sent everywhere. But it was getting through that first hurdle of thinking, I don't think I can do this. I don't know if I'm built for this.
Yeah.
And Vic had to concede, after that first night, said, you picked the right time to get it right. Because if it hadn't gone right, it would have been a disaster, at that point.
Yeah, that's great. So how many years was it that you were at Warner Brothers Movie World that you committed your life to?
Well, look, overall, it was 20 years, and from my 20s to my 40s. So it was pretty much half my life. At the time I left, I'd spent half my life there. But it wasn't all in one slog. I did the first 4 years, and then I went away on tour with Simon and John. We did the Pirates of Penzance, those shows. But I never wanted to just leave. I felt a connection to the park. So I took a leave of absence, if you will, like a long service leave. It wasn't called that, it was leave without pay. But I'd do like several months of rehearsals and tour, and every time there'd be a break in the tour, I'd come back to the coast and do a few shifts at Movie World just to keep connected to it. So then and every performer, you know, when you get towards the end of a contract, you think, oh, what's next? What am I going to do next? What's the rest of my life going to look like? So when the tour's finished and I came back to the coast, I had that week of, oh, well, now what? And Movie World pretty much picked me up straight away again because I'd been on their books the whole time. They brought me back in as a casual, but straight into full-time hours. So it was really a gift, you know. And right now I have to be grateful because it's not just, you know, plenty of other people in the industry. It's not because I'm amazing. It's because I was the right place at the right time and had the right skill sets. And I was able to waltz straight back into it. So it's in constant work, and I have the parks to thank for that.
How do you make that transition from frontline performer, having all that fun, it's feeding the ego and there's an adrenaline rush associated with it? How do you make that transition comfortably from a performer into a leadership role where it is more administrative and now it is more about managing books and looking at budgets?
I think I got to the point, and I touched on it when I talked about when I was on set, in that I got to a point where the performing part started to didn't feel like it was a real work anymore. And I don't mean that because I thought it was easy, but I think that I got to the point where, okay, I'm doing this now. I feel like there should be more to it, more to what I'm doing. And I want to contribute more. I've got more in me than just the performance. You know, whether it was because I was overly creative or overly hands-on. And I may have been a little bit inspired by working with Simon Gallagher when he toured. He was the lead act, but he was the producer of the show, and it was his money. And so every day he's in the office and he's working out the scripts for the next show. He's writing the music, and then he's starring in the show. I thought that sort of inspired me. Well, I could be more than what I'm doing now. I also think I got involved when you're in a theme park for so long. And again, it's not like a theatre where you go for a couple of hours and go home again. You're there all day. You're in the green room, you've got relationships with all the other departments. I got involved in the politics almost, if you will. And then I could see opportunities saying, well, we could be doing this better, or you know, we could be doing more with this, or our resources aren't being adequately utilised. You know, and I got sort of more involved, and from that end, every time there was a committee, I'd be on it. You know, every time there'd be some meeting or a training program, I'd be in it. You know, and I sort of transitioned bit by bit. I was always still performing, but then I'd be the guy that sort of presented a script for the new batch show. So look, this is a better way of doing it. Or I'd be asked to be involved in the creation of something else. So I was gradually getting in there. Then I took a month off to do a show in Brisbane at QPAC. And during that month, I suppose backtrack a bit, one of the shows I was doing at Movie World was the Maverick Illusion show, which was great fun. And that ran for some years.
Based on the Mel Gibson, Jodie Foster.
That's right. 2,000 seat stadium. It was a good show. I took a month off that to do a show in Brisbane. And while I was there, I was called up and told, oh, there's a cast meeting, can you make it? Well, I can't, I've got the show on, but I can be there tomorrow. So I came down tomorrow, found out that the Maverick show had been closed down and the cast will be made redundant. And I was made redundant, but still casual to do Batman and atmosphere shifts, but the show's in. So I was in that phase again of, well, what the hell do I do? There was a few of us, in fact, Chris Crew was in that cast as well, and there was that case of, well, what do we do? You know, am I going to live off casual shifts still doing this again?
We should mention Chris Grew when you drop that name. He has his own episode in the Park Life Season 1 series too, for people who want to know. And
I guess like me, Chris was part of that scene, and we have a love and a passion for it. And we both found ourselves in that scenario. Well, what do we do? Yeah. And then I think Chris started working at SeaWorld at that point as an announcer, and I went on tour again with Simon, and I was in Newcastle in my apartment, accommodation. We were doing the shows in Newcastle when Tony Lyons, who was the HR manager at the time, called me and said, they've just made the entertainment manager redundant. They're restructuring the show and ent department. Would you come back and help us build the street theatre team? We want to get a new street. Steve Pete, who was the COO, wanted to build a street theatre team. I said, sure. So here I'm back again. back into a full-time role, and now I'm actually got a real position I get to sink my teeth into. I'm now managing a team, small team, and I'm managing a little team. Suddenly I've got a whole range of new skill sets I have to develop in terms of the rostering, the procedures, safety management, all of that stuff I have to develop. And that sort of grew me. That was a fast-paced growth for me. And it was an interesting time then because Showanet was in a state of flux. They didn't have an entertainment manager yet per se. So we had all these supervisors trying to work out where we all fit in the picture. We had the HR manager was kind of overseeing the department because the department didn't have it. And I think you're very familiar with what happens next because that's sort of when you came on board and sort of gave us some kind of structure and some kind of framework. So it was a very big learning curve on a number of levels because there was a certain amount of diplomacy involved, so a certain amount of, not to beat about the bush, there was also a lot of egos to sort of manage, and it was an interesting and slightly difficult time. It was also very exciting because we were doing some new things as well. And we got some new equipment. Steve Peter brought in a big screen and some new technology that I was sort of given, not control of, but the responsibility of to bring that in. So that was a big step for me in terms of my growth.
How have you moved through your journey? How have you moved through adversity? When adversity hits, what's your attitude to that?
Well, you've got two options really. Either you cave in or you push through it. And I've always tried to look for opportunity. Okay, if something bad's happening, the department's falling apart, well, either we fall apart or I find an opportunity to do something with it. If there's a gap, how can I fill it and make it better rather than weep about the fact that there's a gap. When the street did change, or when we were being restructured, I had a choice of, well, I can either buck the system, be angry about it, or I can get on board and use this opportunity to strengthen the team. And I'm sure you're aware, I've always been fiercely loyal to the Showanet department. And I never wanted, and there have been times where the Showanet department's been laughed at. When I say laughed at, because it's not a revenue generating department.
It's a cost centre.
And because it's seen, oh, they're just playing in costumes,
yes,
sometimes it doesn't get the level of respect that your food and beverage team might get or some of the other teams might get. And I didn't want that. I didn't want them to see us as a bunch of actors trying to pull their documents together and look like a bunch,
cavalier.
I wanted them to see us, oh, this is a serious department, we should take them seriously, they're doing great things, they're a professional team, they're an internationally standard professional team, let's work with them. And I work with as you know, I work very closely with the marketing team. But prior to that, the Showanet never had worked with the marketing team really.
Yes.
And it wasn't until we started approaching them and saying, well, what are you marketing? What is your target market? And they're saying, well, our sales gap is this demographic. So we could put on a show that appealed to that demographic. You could market it. And then by doing that, we started to get a bit more respect across the board with the other managers and the other departments. And I think that was sort of how you push through, rather than just keep pushing the pieces around and complaining and not coping, saying, well, how do we pull these pieces together and what other opportunities are there and how can we get help from other don't be afraid to lean on other departments for help.
Yes. No, well said, great insights. Can you tell us about the last few years of your professional life? Obviously the world's been turned upside down with COVID, but even prior to the whole COVID chaos, what the most recent role was and is for you?
Okay, so when I left the parks, I went to business with my brothers for a couple of years in the hospitality scene, which was fine, but it ultimately wasn't what I wanted to do. And a year into that, a friend of mine, and I'm name dropping, but Michael Boyd, the magician, who produces a few shows, and I've worked with him before, he and I worked together to put on a show at the casino, which was an enormous amount of fun. A lot of challenges, don't get me wrong, but an enormous amount of fun. And that's sort of what kicked me back into thinking, I want to be in this industry again. I want to get involved again. Because I was running a business in Surfers Paradise, I got onto the board of the Surfers Paradise Alliance, which was a council-controlled entity charged with promoting Service Paradise and boosting the economic outcomes in Service Paradise. And by doing that, they did it with major events. While sitting on the board, the events director resigned, and as a board member, we were coming up with what the new role should look like. And as we're designing the role, it occurred to me that I'd rather be doing that. So I said to my fellow board members, you know, I'm going to stand down from the board and I'm going to apply for this role, which I got. And so for 5 years, I was the event director for Surfers Paradise Alliance. So we direct all the major events in Surfers Paradise. The C5 international fireworks shows, the arts festivals, the music festivals. Some of it was pretty big stuff. And again, it was extremely challenging, a whole other level of learning. I was dealing with political departments, funding models, reporting to a council level. You know, we're using community funds. Well, they're not community funds. The funds were actually derived from businesses. So we then had to report back to those businesses, well, why are they paying us? What are they getting for it? So we had to show the return on investment, on the economic drive. So there's a whole other gamut of work there that was sort of beyond what I had done in the past. COVID comes. No more major events, no more mass gatherings. So everything we were doing was completely illegal. You know, where we would be getting 100,000 people crammed on the beach, you can't do any of that. So for the last half of 2020, was it? First half of 2020, basically deconstructing everything we were building. We had contracts with major artists, $100,000 contract, major artists, that I had to break out of, you know, to go through with a lawyer as to what, you know, and then dealing with their agents and managers. I had I had artists booked in America. I had to then deconstruct all of that, then come back to me what they're out of pocket for because they've already booked their flights and all of that stuff. So that was my isolation at home in the storeroom, because I don't have a home office, with my laptop, trying to pull apart everything I'd spent years building.
Wow.
Which was emotionally taxing.
And again, in that space, you touched on it before, there's more adversity there. You're alone in a storeroom, trying to find an office. You've got, by this time, 2 children. Yep. And everyone's going through some COVID trauma, no doubt. But to talk through yours specifically, the very work you do no longer exists. How did you keep your sanity?
Look, it wasn't, I nearly didn't, to be honest. There was a couple of points there, some pretty low points in that. But for a few months I was still employed. So at least I've got money coming in at the moment. I have a team, and they're all at home doing the same things. So regular Zoom meetings with the team, checking in, make sure they're okay to start with and how they're coping. And then also seeing, well, you know, have you been in touch with so-and-so from ELS? You know, because that's got to stop, and we're blah, blah, blah. And then working out, well, what is it that we can do? Because we had a marketing team as well. Saying, well, we still have businesses in Surfers Paradise. We can't just forget them. So now we have to find ways of promoting the ones that are still open. Some of them were still open, some of them were doing takeaways, some of them were doing, you know, you could drop in and pick up your food, grabs, deliveries. Some of them were consultancy businesses. So we still need to find a way of letting people know that those businesses are still there. So that gave us a new direction. To try and, for one, help them out, but it was also helping us out, giving us a purpose, sense of purpose. Little things like the Anzac Day, you know, and every Anzac thing was cancelled. But I still got a trumpeter out there on the beach, you know, on his own with a microphone, and I still had the trumpet at dawn throughout Surfers Paradise. The whole Surfers Paradise would have heard, because I had satellite speakers set up, so everyone would have heard it. They all came out on their balconies. Beautiful. They heard it. Yeah. So we did a few little things like that just to, okay, we're still alive, guys. Don't pack up and die. We're still living. We're still eating. We still have moments that we need to remember. You know? That's good. So that got us through that part of it. But then there's also well, what happens next? You know, the whole funding, council, governments, the whole funding model changed. Suddenly the priority is trying to keep businesses alive. You know, so all the funding was then pushed towards that. It wasn't about events anymore. There's no event money. So they recreated and restructured the whole event scene. And then I was working out, well, where do I now fit in that? I got lucky. I've got a contract directly with council, with a division, because we knew that once, it wasn't like that. There was a lot of months of work involved. And again, I have to mention this, my wife was very supportive because she didn't know what was going to happen to us, how we're going to pay the mortgage, how we're going to survive. I'm out of work. And I was doing months of work, 3 or 4 months of work, developing event briefs, developing strategy documents, a lot of work. Like I was working as if it was full time for no money at that point. By then, it's no money. And she's saying, well, why are you doing this? No one's paying you. I said, well, eventually someone will. If I sit around and do nothing and wait for someone to pay me, it's not going to happen. And then sure enough, those documents eventually landed me 4 contracts, which got us back on our feet, and we sailed through the next year from that. Then during that time, the Gold Coast Show contacted me, the president of the Gold Coast Show Society, because their entire team had gone, the previous Gold Coast Show team,
Right.
and said, oh, would you help us with our COVID safety document? We'll give you a 2-week contract to finish that. Okay, all right, so I got on board, I get a 2-week contract with the Gold Coast Show, and I draft up their COVID safety document. Quite a big document.
I bet.
But there was a lot of reference material I could use, so it wasn't too bad. Then they put me on for another 2-week contract. Would you stay on for another 2 weeks and do our event management plan that we need to submit to council? Okay, sure, I'll do that. Would you stay on for another 2 weeks and do our risk management plan? Sure, right. By the 3rd contract, they said, well, do you want to just come on board and be our show manager? I said, sure, okay. I come into the office. It's a big office,
Yeah.
a lot of desks and stuff. So, okay, so who's the team? Where's the team? And they looked at me like, team? I said, well, yeah, who looks after the exhibitors? Oh, that would be you. All right, well, then who's booking the entertainment? Well, that would be you. Well, then who's doing it? That would be you. So they didn't have a team because their team was gone.
Yeah.
All they had was the board of directors, who were all volunteers, and the
Right.
president, who's a volunteer. Very passionate people about
bet.
but there's no team. There's a receptionist, secretary that's been with them for years, thank God, because she has great history, and there's me. And then we bring on a person for 1 day a week to do our social media, and another PR manager that's on contract part-time, and we build the Gold Coast Show. So that was a mighty journey last year.
I can imagine.
Mighty journey, which I'm starting again now at the moment.
Yeah.
But that gave me, and you might appreciate this, because prior to that last year or so, I've just been doing small gigs and small activations to promote and help the businesses get back on their feet. The Gold Coast Show gave me a sense of scale, something big again.
Yes.
And I think I jumped the question. I guess for those months of strategy documents, that was to try and come up with a plan with the business committees in Broadbeach and Service Paradise of how we're going to recover from the lockdowns. How do we rebuild a vibe in Service Paradise and Broadbeach now that the Service Paradise Alliance and the Broadbeach Alliance are gone? No one's there to do that. How do we claw that back? And the councillor for the division is super supportive and realised that he's got a big division with a lot of hurting businesses, and he's sort of backed me to put in these activations. And I had Humphrey Bear in Service Paradise. I brought Sesame Street into Service Paradise.
Fantastic.
I had stilt walkers and stuff. Little small things, but constant. So that every weekend there was something happening in Main Beach or Service Paradise or Broadbeach or Chevron Island.
People can see the hearts pumping.
That's right.
Yeah.
So now at Chevron Island, every Wednesday night there's live entertainment. And so every Wednesday night those businesses are booming, because now there's that expectation or knowledge that it's on.
And is this now, this chapter of your life, this is a long-term thing for you going forward? You can see there's more opportunities for growth?
No, this is scary waters.
Yeah.
This is scary because everything's on contract base.
Right.
And I know you've been there in your time.
Yeah.
And everyone in our field has at some point, where you're going from contract to contract, and well, okay, great, what happens next? I don't really know now. So while you're working hard on delivering the contract you're currently on, you're working hard to try and find the next contract.
Right.
So it's twice as hard almost as your old jobs were.
Yeah. Even knowing that though, you wouldn't, by the sounds of things, you wouldn't change anything in terms of, it's been a life lived in the arts, it's been a life lived in events and entertainment. And the nature of that life is everything you just said.
Yeah.
What happens after this?
That's right.
know?
And to some extent that makes it exciting, to some extent it makes it terrifying.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely terrifying. And a lot of people, you hear them say, oh, if I knew then what I know now, or I'd do things differently. I think if I knew then what I know now, I would have enjoyed it more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there were times when I was so full of my own ego that I didn't take the time to say, hey, this is fun. Because I kept thinking, oh, things could be better. Yeah. And that think you'll be better attitude makes you work harder usually.
Yes.
Some people just sit around complaining that they're not better. Some people strive to make them better. But if I was just relaxed a bit more, I said, look, things are good, things will get better. I'll just enjoy now. I didn't do that enough.
That's a really great lesson, and I'm sure a lot of us can identify with that. It resonates. Where was the turning point in that for you then, where you can transcend through ego and transcend through being busy, and realise I've got to have more presence?
Look, I think your kids can help you with that.
Yes.
I think there are times when the kids will say something or do something, you realise, oh, hang on, I should be more here for you.
Yes.
Yeah. But before the kids, as a performer, the early years, I was, as a lot of them are, I was very egotistic.
Well, it's about me.
Well, it's about you, but I think a lot of it's a front. I think it's psychological.
Yeah.
I think because, and you mentioned it before, you are vulnerable as a performer, and you're only as good as you think you are, or as good as someone else thinks you are. And you need to constantly convince yourself that you're good, otherwise you'll pack it in. And if you don't have that ego and that you're fully yourself, then you're not going to walk into an audition and nail it. You're going to walk into an audition and apologise for being there. So you have to have that front. I think what...
That can be exhausting.
Well, it is exhausting. It's thoroughly exhausting. And what worked for me, I think, at some point, knowing or understanding that, and then recognising what that is, and say, okay, I'm not this. This is what I present, but I'm just a guy, and if I get so caught up in this, it's going to stop me from learning that.
Very good.
And it was realising that then helped me then get to the next phase, I think, of my life.
Yeah, that's really well said. If you had to look back, I'm sure there's many. Is there a single moment where you were present and thought, I'm really proud of this? I'm sure there's many.
There's been a few, and then, and like yourself, when you've got a big event on and you pull it off, then you get that proud moment. Yeah, and there's obviously been many, but there's been a few key ones, and I think one of the, and largely because of what it was, but we did the Alara Conference. And for those who don't know, the Alara is an association of theme parks and attractions that connect to, but that's the Australian Association, and IAAPA is the international one. And in one year, IAAPA was held on the Gold Coast in conjunction with Alara. And Village Roadshow Theme Parks was one of the hosts and sponsors. So I was then put in charge of the entertainment for most of the week-long event. And that included activations at the casino, activations at Movie World and at SeaWorld. And we did a big show at SeaWorld, a ski show, and I had never done a ski show before. Big ski show at SeaWorld with all of the conference heads from around the world. And it was going to be introducing the new president for the next year, blah, blah, blah. And so I did a James Bond themed ski show, to the point where we even got Roger Moore to do a piece to camera for it.
Come on.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
And I regret that I didn't get a chance to go to film with him.
Yes.
He was obviously in Monaco, where he lives, but he did a piece to camera and sent it to us to address the Alara Conference, welcome them aboard.
That's huge.
And then when he finished his piece, we had a big screen on the side of the lake. When he finished his piece, it then cut to the gun barrel sequence from Spy Who Loved Me. So it was him again. And then at the end of the gun barrel sequence, we switched the live camera on the screen of the boat coming up onto the beach. The girls came out to the James Bond music. They captured the current president of the IAAPA, of Alara, put him in the boat and kidnapped him. And then Bond comes running in, and then we've got ninjas, and we've got the whole ski show all happens around it. Chris Grew actually played M.
Perfect. Tell me you played Bond.
No, no, I was one of the ninjas. Well, I was producing the show. It's actually funny. I was producing the show, and Brian Maluski was the ski show captain. And he hadn't known me from a bar of soap. Right? He hadn't met me before, because I was always just at Movie World at that point. So I'm talking with him about how we're going to do this show. We're looking about the patterns and stuff. And then at one point we've got the ninjas and stuff. Well, how are we going to do this? Oh, you know what? I'll just jump in and I'll do that ninja on the night, just to get it on, right? And he looked at me funny, but it didn't click. Right? So then on the night, or on the rehearsals, I come running in, I've got my swords, my nunchaku, I'm doing all these kicks and stuff, and we've finished the rehearsal, and Brian looks at me like flabbergasted. Man, I thought you were just going to stand in like a manager or something, but you can do it. I said, yeah, it's what I used to do. I was a stunt performer, but he had no idea. So he's wondering, why is this manager just coming in and doing a ninja? But that show, it was a freaking hard turnaround because we didn't have a lot of time to put the show together. But that was one of those moments where I sat back and said, that's a good show, and we pulled it off, and it was great.
And in front
we even built, because we had the villain was Blofeld, we even put a wheelchair on the ski disc. So the Blofeld was on his wheelchair skiing behind the skiers. And so we had everything, we had it all going on.
That's fantastic. What gets you up and motivated? You've obviously got a good sense of resilience, but what continues to get you up and keeps you motivated to keep moving? What drives that?
I think, besides the cup of coffee, everyone, I think there's always a project to do. I have projects to complete. At the moment, I've got 4 or 5 on the table and that I'm way behind in, but getting up and doing those and wanting to see those through to fruition. I think I have that sense of commitment. And so if you're going to commit to an event, then you've got to work through and get it done. You can't not do it. You can't just, you know what, halfway through just developing an event, you can't just say, oh, you know what, I don't want to do it now. You've got people, you've got stakeholders involved, you've got your name on it, so you have to finish it. So you can either grumble and struggle, or you can get your hands in and make it happen.
Yeah, again, well said. I identify completely with what you're saying. I hadn't thought about it like that. But you're absolutely right. You can get so far in, there is no turning back.
That's it, yeah. Unless you want to leave town and never see anyone again. You do a Christopher Skase and bugger off to it.
There's an old school reference for you.
Yeah.
But we literally live on an island separated by a number of states at the back end of the world. And people will know, is this person a good operator?
Oh, that's it.
Or not?
The town's too small
to not see it through.
That's right.
It's a great way to finish, mate. It's been terrific to sit with you and capture some of your story. It's a little bit ambient, noisy around us at the moment because we're sitting in the Oasis shopping centre in Broadbeach. But the reason for that is you also on the side have a coffee outlet here. Where would people find you?
Okay, we're on level 1 in the Oasis shopping centre. I bought this place because I kept sitting here with my laptop to do my work because I don't have an office. I thought, well, I'm spending so much on coffee, I'll just buy the business.
That could be the name of your book. Mate, thanks for sitting down. It's been terrific to finally get you in the Park Life series, so I appreciate you making time. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers, mate.